Hello, welcome back to another AVY Painting Studios Japan video. This time we're looking at some Bretonnian horses that I'm doing for a commission for a gentleman in the United States. So we are going to be looking at the actual barding and how I paint them. I've done all the base coats on all the horses already, so I didn't want to bore you with all that kind of work initially. So now we're just going into basically the shading and highlighting of the horse barding. So on the palette to start with, I've just got some orange ink, I've got some yellow glaze from watercolors, and I've got some sunburst yellow from watercolors as well. Basically I'm just making a nice little mix to make it a really nice warm yellow, and that warm yellow I'm sort of just brushing in to where the creases and where the shade will fall in our yellow on our barding. And then using the sort of the glaze and the paint, mixing that back in, so sort of pushing it back into the crevices, into the folds, so we get this really nice smooth transition between the two colors. We don't want it too stark, we don't want it too patchy, so we want to just, because yellow is a really hard color and quite a difficult color to work with in some cases. Now I'm using beige. Now beige is a Vallejo color, and I'd really recommend using beige for your yellows, because it's such a wonderful color to use as an underlay if you're going over blacks, we'll look at that later, or as a highlight. So I'm using beige as part of the highlight for this, and I'm using ivory as well. Those two colors are sort of the main key colors I use for highlighting yellows. And then I sort of just wet blend that into the original coat that I have. You can see it's quite wet still, and I like keeping it wet so that way I can sort of blend in the colors naturally. And so if it was dry, it sort of becomes a bit more difficult to do that, so I like to work with a wet underlay of paint and then just sort of work in the highlights from there. Now we come to the red barding, so I just gave it a base coat of blood red over a white primer. Gave it a couple of coats just to give it a nice coating there. You need to give red a good 2 to 3 coats just to get the best coverage, and I'm very impressed with how the watercolors paints, especially the blood red and the sunburst yellow, have been so far. They're my ideal colors for those two in the range from the Nostalgia 94, so I've been very happy with those. So basically I'm just going to give it another coat here and just make sure that I've got that really vibrant red to start off with as a base before we start highlighting. Now we come to the highlights. Now as on my palette you can see that I have some orange, which basically is just the sunburst yellow mixed in with the blood red and getting like a 50-50 mix. Now you can see the paint on the horse is still wet, and I'm just going to just brush that straight on. Okay, so I can create those sort of highlights and sort of blend it through, and I'm just got to be a bit brave here, and as you can see the paint is sort of just dissolving and sort of just melding together, and that's kind of the effect I really want. Again, if you want to do that over like a dry base coat, it becomes a little bit more difficult. You need to sort of start blending back in and that kind of thing. Having a wet underlay of paint to start with just makes it just much easier for me anyway to get those nice soft subtle transitions of highlights. Now we're going to come to the highlights, and highlighting red. Basically just add more yellow to your mix and make sure that the underlaid color is still wet, so that way you can still blend in, create those really nice smooth subtle transitions, and that's what we're looking for here, nice and subtle transitions. Again, if the paint has dried underneath, just add some more red to the base, your base coat, and then just add that, sort of yellow orange mixture there to create some highlights. And then sort of you're just going to take your time and blend in until you get a nice smooth transition between the two, and that it's not too orangey, not too yellowy. You're just going to create a nice balance. Again, red and yellow are very difficult colors to work with, and you just need to take your time and just create that nice balance between the two colors. We'll come to the black barding. So the horse has been primed white, but then I gave it a coat of chaos black from war colors over the top of that, a couple of coats of that. Then, as I like to use blue as one of it's more of a subtle transition between sort of the mid-tone and the highlight. So I like using dark Prussian blue. That's another Vallejo model color paint that I like to add into that base mix and give it a nice subtle mid-tone. Okay, next step, blue grey pale is add to the mix of our black blue mid-tone highlight, and then you can see me sort of just brushing that onto the top there of our black barding, and then mixing it back into the black and sort of just bringing it back so we've got a nice transition between the two colors, and just using that black sort of wet underlay as a way of just blending the two colors through. Just add some more of that blue-grey pale to create some more of a fine highlights there on the very edges of the barding folds of the cloth, and that way you can create this really nice sharp highlights. Onto blue barding. So this time we're going to use the dark Prussian blue as a base coat. So it's really nice and deep and dark here. I'm just giving another sort of touch up here and there, just to make it a nice sort of wet underlay for when we do the highlights. And as I've used the black using a lot of that pale blue grey, I'm just going to mix that pale blue grey into the blue. And I've also got some Vallejo game colour wolf grey on my palette as well. I'm just going to mix that in as well, so that way I've just got, I always usually have a few different greys or different paints on there that I'm sort of mixing in to different colours. It's quite natural. I think you guys do the same. And whatever's available on my palette, I sort of just grab it and sort of mix it in, and that way I create these kind of highlights. It's not sort of there's no sort of scientific formula to it. It's like whatever's on my palette, I just grab it and just mix it in, and it tends to work. So I'm just going to use that again and sort of use it as a wet blend and create some nice highlights on those folds on the very, concentrate on the very top of the model and sort of bring it down so it's darker within the folds in the recesses. And then we'll come to really giving some really nice sharp highlights. I just basically added more wolf grey into the base mix, and now we've got as a base we've got a very subtle transition between the the very dark Prussian blue to more of a lighter grey in the highlighted areas. And now we're basically just sort of penciling in the very sharp areas of the model that we want to really define and really stand out. So that's basically what we're going to do here. Now, as you can see, I'm sort of working back, and if there's something that's sort of out of place or there's a mistake, well, I just grabbed more of that dark Prussian blue and I sort of just work it back into the paint and create some more transitions of blending there. Okay, so now I'm going to just put some Prussian blue on my palette here, and I've just sort of set out some sort of basic markings, some sort of triangular shapes, V shapes, stripes, and that kind of thing on the barding. Nothing too sophisticated, just quite easy. I didn't have any transfers, and the commission was that the client didn't really want any sort of very fancy, intricate kind of details on the models, so I just did something very, very basic. So you can see me just sort of lining in various different patterns and that kind of thing on the barding, just to make it quite simple. But I wanted each horse to be, and each rider to be clearly identified as something individual, and none of them to be the same. So I used various checker patterns, I used stripes, of course. This one is more like a Crusader type influenced. I think I've been looking too much at the Baron's War models from Footsore Miniatures, and it's got this kind of very Christian Crusader type heraldry on the barding, but it looked quite effective. And I think looking at the 5th edition book as well from Warhammer gave me a lot of inspiration in using different ideas to apply to these horses to make them all very individual. So whether they were quartered like this one, and for this one here we used a beige to go over the black. And it's a really good technique if you want to paint yellow over dark colors. Use beige as an underlay and then use your yellow over the top of that. So here I've just used some sunburst yellow, got some more of that orange ink, made a nice mix, and over that beige it will just go straight over. It's beautiful. So that's a tip for anybody who's painting yellow over dark colors. Get that Vallejo beige. I bought it by accident, to be honest. I bought it thinking it was a different color altogether, thinking that I'll never use it. And it's almost like the verdigris that I use for underlaying whites as well. Another paint I thought I'd never use, but then they'd become the most useful paints I've ever had. So just for a tip for anybody who's painting yellow over black or over any other dark surface, use beige as a base coat, then use your yellows of choice, mix it with some ink or some glaze if you have it there, and it provides this really wonderful undercoat for your yellows. And you can see the results here after highlighting it, that they come up a treat. Now, talking about verdigris, I'm going to use it here. Now, I use it as an underlay for white, and it's been a really nice color, especially for my high elves. All those high elves, all the white's been used. This has been used as a base coat before I apply the white. And I saw that from Patrick. He's a gentleman in Sweden who's a painter, and he used that for one of his Call of the Crown challenge entries for his white lions. And I saw that and I thought, wow, that's a really good idea. I might have to try that, because I had verdigris and I didn't know why I bought it, and started using it, and I thought it was a wonderful color to use as an underlay for white. And it's just my mainstay now. I can't paint white without it as a sort of a base color. And what it does, I know it's a little bit green, and maybe that's just down to personal preference. People may or may not like it, but I just find it just the subtlest color between white and that as just a sort of a shade, if you like, between that and the white. So yeah, it's just really nice. Just looking for subtlety, and I think that really brings it nicely. I'm using it again here to create these heart-shaped motifs on the barding, and penciling in a heart shape, and that will be worked in over time on all quarters of the horse barding, and then over the top of that we're going to use some white. So I'm using white now after I've made the shape of the hearts, and using white. I'm using Warcolors white, which is really nice thinned out white actually. It's perfect, it's really nice. At first I sort of didn't like it being so thin, but then I realized it's a really nice color to do the overlays or highlights or blending and that kind of thing. It's really nice. It's not chalky, it's nice and smooth, and it worked out really well actually in a lot of cases. Now for the yellow, I'm going to paint some nice lines in here. It's kind of like an upside down V, and you've got to be a bit brave when you're using blacks over yellows. But if you can draw it out on a piece of paper first, to get your confidence up a little bit, if that helps. But yeah, doing these kind of lines and doing these kind of freehand markings, just draw it out on a piece of paper first before you start applying to the model, just so you feel a bit more confident when you start laying it in with your paint. Now the fleur-de-lis. So we're going to have to use, I'm going to use some of the verdigris. Again, draw this on a piece of paper first before you start painting this onto your red barding or black barding, whatever it might be. Okay, because you're going to have to go back and correct it. That's just the nature of freehand. It's just, unless you're very lucky and you can get it done the first time perfectly. If you have a transfer, ideally that'd be the perfect way of doing it. That way you've got no problems. You can do it. You can apply that design perfectly. Okay, but if you're going to do it with freehand, then you're just going to have to mark out a rough sort of shape of what the design is, and then go back with your base color and then sort of correct the areas that you need to line in or bring back into shape and that kind of thing. So there's kind of a big learning curve with freehand, but the more you do it, the better you will get at it. Once you get your basic shape worked out, then you can start using some white and going over the verdigris. Now you can just go from white as well. It doesn't really matter. On this particular horse, I'm going to go from a very simple sort of straight line across here with the verdigris. Okay, and I'm going to paint some nice sort of red markings on this particular horse because I wanted the standard bearer and the musician to stand out a little bit more than the other guys. I really wanted something a little bit special on these models. Now I'm using some kind of imperial type symbol here that's used on the Empire, but I think looks like the Bretonnians use it as well, because I looked at the 5th edition book looking for ideas for icons and that kind of thing for the Barding, and I found this kind of simple design that I could confidently do in freehand. I didn't want to do anything really overly complex like painting like eagles or things like that, like dragons or whatever. I mean, I could do it, but to get it done 4 times on each quarter, or things like that on the shield, on the actual chest of the knight's armor and that kind of thing, to replicate that numerous times can be quite difficult. If you're doing it once, it's maybe not so challenging thing. But basically, I'm just creating these little red boxes. I sort of painted a dot to evenly space them on each side, and then sort of painted a red box to start off with. And when that dried, using some white paint on my palette here, I'm just going to pencil in using a very fine brush just on the angles, just going from the corner into the center and lining in on each side. And you have this sort of quartered look to this kind of, it's almost like a German imperial symbol, but I know they use this icon in the Empire, in Warhammer Fantasy, and it's used on one of the horse bardings in the 5th edition army book as well. And I thought this is a nice little motif I can use for this particular musician, and it sort of sets him apart from everybody else. So it's not that unachievable, and of course, things are not going to work perfectly. I need to go back with the red and sort of correct things and shape them to get them as neat as possible. I mean, transfers are ideal, of course, but you know, if you don't have transfers like I did, then doing these kind of very simple designs are good practice for you. And this brings us to the end of the video, guys. So I hope you enjoyed this look at the barding on horses. We'll cover horses later on in other videos in the future. But thank you again for watching and commenting, and it always gives me great enthusiasm and inspiration to carry on and do some more of these for you guys. Please listen to the podcast. Please consider becoming a patron to help support me, and I'll see you again in the next one. Take care.